If a dinner invitation feels too perfect, you should start asking why. That was the thought sitting quietly in the back of my mind the night my son Daniel invited me to what he called a special family dinner. I remember standing in my kitchen that afternoon, holding the elegant cream-colored card he had mailed instead of simply calling like he usually did. The paper was thick, the handwriting was Ashley's, and the words were almost overly sweet. "Mom, please come celebrate with us tonight. We have wonderful news." Ashley always liked to add a little drama to things, but something about the invitation felt rehearsed. Still, when your only son invites you to dinner, you go. I drove the 32 miles to their new house just outside the city, a large modern place Daniel had bought last year after his promotion. The driveway lights were already glowing when I arrived, and the front of the house looked like something out of a magazine, all glass and stone and perfectly trimmed hedges. As I stepped out of my car, I noticed another vehicle parked along the curb, a black sedan I didn't recognize. That struck me as odd. Family dinners usually meant just the three of us. When Daniel opened the door, he smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mom, you made it," he said, giving me a quick hug before stepping aside. Inside, the house smelled like roasted chicken and fresh bread, the kind of warm scent that usually makes a place feel like home. Ashley appeared from the dining room with her bright, practiced smile. "Margaret, you look wonderful tonight," she said, touching my arm lightly. The dining table behind her was already set with polished silverware, crystal glasses, and neatly folded linen napkins. It looked less like a casual dinner and more like a formal gathering. That was when I noticed the fourth chair at the table. I didn't say anything at first, but my eyes moved around the room, taking in small details that felt slightly out of place. A leather briefcase rested on the sideboard. A stack of neatly arranged folders sat near the end of the table. Daniel followed my gaze and quickly moved in front of them, almost as if he didn't want me to look too closely. "We thought tonight could be important," he said carefully. I nodded slowly, forcing a polite smile while a quiet uneasiness began to settle in my chest. After 68 years of life, you learn to trust that feeling when something doesn't add up. But I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Families sometimes plan surprises. Still, as I walked toward the dining room, I couldn't shake the strange sense that this evening had been arranged a little too carefully, as if every chair, every document, and every smile had been placed exactly where someone wanted them to be. And at that moment, I had no idea that within the next few minutes, someone in that house would risk their job just to warn me that I should leave immediately. As I sat down at the dinner table, I couldn't ignore the strange atmosphere hanging in the air. The clink of silverware felt too loud, too sharp, and the silence that settled over the room was thick, almost uncomfortable. Daniel and Ashley were both smiling, but there was something forced about it. Daniel poured me a glass of wine, but his hand shook just slightly as he did. "We've been meaning to talk to you, Mom," he said, his voice a little too casual. I raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything, my eyes scanning the room once again. My gaze landed on the folders on the table and the leather briefcase sitting quietly in the corner of the room. This wasn't just dinner. I knew it. Something was off. Before I could ask about the folders, Ashley spoke up, her voice just a bit too sweet. "We've been working on something, and we thought it would be the perfect time to share it with you," she said, her eyes gliding over the papers. I noticed a slight tension in her shoulders, as though she was waiting for something. I smiled and nodded, trying to play along. I'd been through enough family dinners to know when something felt wrong, but I wasn't about to spoil the evening by making a scene. The conversation drifted for a few moments, but my mind was racing. The feeling that I was being watched intensified, and I couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that something was happening right under my nose. Just as I was about to ask about the papers, Lucia, the maid, appeared in the doorway, holding a tray of freshly baked bread. She gave me a brief nod as she entered the room, but there was something in her eyes that made me pause. She placed the bread on the table with a practiced grace, but as she turned to leave, she hesitated. For a split second, our eyes met. She looked at me, then quickly averted her gaze, and before I could blink, she slipped a folded piece of paper into my hand. I stared at the paper for a moment, unsure of what was happening. Lucia had been working for us for years, always polite, always professional. I had never seen her act this way. The paper felt cold in my hand as I unfolded it under the table. The words written on it were simple, yet they struck me like a punch to the stomach: run now. I froze. My heart raced, and I felt the room around me blur. The wine glass in front of me, the laughter at the table, it all seemed to fade into the background. I looked up at Lucia, but she was already gone, vanishing down the hallway. I couldn't explain it, but something told me this wasn't a joke. There was urgency in her eyes, something I hadn't noticed before. I quickly glanced at the others. Daniel and Ashley were engaged in conversation, but their words felt distant, as though I was hearing them underwater. I didn't know what was happening, but I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. Something terrible was about to unfold. I couldn't leave, not yet, but I knew one thing for sure: this dinner was no ordinary family gathering. Whatever was coming, I wasn't going to be caught off guard. My fingers tightened around the note, feeling the words burn into my skin. Run now. The room around me continued like nothing had happened, but I felt my heart hammering in my chest. Daniel and Ashley were deep in conversation, their voices light and polite, but their eyes betrayed something deeper. I couldn't make sense of it all. Why would Lucia, someone I trusted, slip me a note like that? And what exactly was she trying to warn me about? I glanced down at the note again, but the words didn't change. My eyes darted back to Daniel, who was laughing at something Ashley had said, the two of them so at ease, so familiar. I didn't know what was worse, the fact that I didn't know what was going on, or the gnawing suspicion that I might already be too late. The air in the room felt heavy, and I could almost feel the walls closing in around me. I needed to think, but I couldn't do it with the pressure of their eyes on me. I shifted in my seat, looking for a way out, but before I could move, I caught sight of something out of place. There, sitting next to the plate of roast chicken, was a thick envelope. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it was impossible to ignore. It was sealed, crisp, and waiting. My first instinct was to reach for it, but I stopped myself. There was no telling what was inside, and right now, I wasn't sure if I was ready to find out. I could feel my pulse racing, my mind spinning, but I knew I had to stay calm. If I made a scene, I'd risk tipping them off. I had to play this carefully, at least for now. But there was one thing I knew for sure: they were trying to trap me. And I wasn't going to let that happen. I slowly pushed the envelope aside with my finger, pretending to reach for my glass of water. The cool liquid calmed me for just a moment, but the knot in my stomach remained. I looked around the room again, trying to make sense of everything. Daniel was too calm. Ashley's smile was too wide. They were waiting for something. Maybe they were waiting for me to sign something. Maybe that was the point of all this. Just as I was about to ask, a quiet voice interrupted my thoughts. "Margaret, would you like some more wine?" Lucia's voice was soft, almost too soft, as she approached the table with a fresh bottle. I looked up at her, and for a second, I saw it, a flicker of something in her eyes. A warning. It was subtle, but it was there. I gave her a small smile, nodding politely. "Yes, thank you." As she poured the wine, I couldn't shake the feeling that the night was unraveling in front of me, and the threads were slipping faster than I could catch them. I needed to know what was going on before it was too late. I needed to figure out why they were trying to trap me, and what exactly they were planning. But one thing was certain: this dinner wasn't just about food. It was about something much bigger. And I was about to find out just how deep the rabbit hole went. The silence stretched between us, thick and oppressive, as I glanced back down at the envelope, my heart pounding in my chest. What exactly were they trying to do? Why had Lucia warned me so urgently? I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, especially Daniel's, who sat across from me with that carefully crafted, almost unnervingly calm expression. It was like he was waiting for something, waiting for me to make a move, to fall into whatever trap they had set. I glanced at Ashley, who had been unusually quiet. She was usually the one to steer the conversation, but tonight she seemed almost distant, as if she were watching me more closely than usual. Her eyes flickered over the papers once more, then back to me. It was subtle, but there was something in her gaze that made me feel like a piece of prey. I could sense the tension in the room building, like a storm that was waiting to break. "I hope you're enjoying the dinner," Ashley finally said, her voice sweet but with an edge. "We really wanted tonight to be special." Special. The word stuck in my mind. I could hear it echoing in my head as I slowly placed the glass of wine back down. Special wasn't the word I would have used to describe this evening. I was trapped. I knew it now. The papers on the table weren't just forms for dinner, they were part of some larger scheme. The question was, what exactly did they want from me? I shifted in my seat, subtly eyeing the documents again, trying to make sense of them. There was no doubt in my mind now that they were trying to get me to sign something, something that would seal my fate, something that would put the last of my assets in their hands. But I wasn't going to be tricked that easily. I had spent years watching people like them, people who pretended to care, who wrapped their lies in sweet smiles. I knew how to spot a con when I saw one. But the question was, how had they gotten so far? And how had they managed to keep it hidden for so long? My mind was racing, but I couldn't let them see it. I needed to stay calm, to keep my composure until I figured out what to do next. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to smile and engage. "It's a lovely dinner," I said, my voice steady but laced with an underlying tension that I hoped they wouldn't notice. "But I'm curious, what exactly is this all about?" I turned my gaze to Daniel, trying to catch any flicker of guilt in his eyes. But he just smiled back, a little too smoothly. "We're just making sure everything is in order," he replied, his voice smooth, but there was something in it that didn't sit right. "You know, for the future." I nodded slowly, pretending to buy the story. But inside, I was screaming. The future. What did that even mean? What future were they planning for? And what did they want from me? Before I could ask another question, Lucia returned, moving around the table with the quiet grace she always had. But there was something different about her this time. As she reached for the empty wine bottle, her hand brushed mine briefly, and I felt a jolt run through me. Her eyes locked with mine for just a moment, and that was when I saw it, the slightest flicker of fear. It was so small, so quick, but it was enough. Enough to tell me everything I needed to know. They were all in this together. And if I didn't act fast, they were going to take everything. I looked back at the table, at the papers, the glass of wine, the untouched bread. I knew I had to make a decision, and I had to make it now. The tension in the room was suffocating, and every minute that passed felt like an eternity. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, Daniel's too calm, Ashley's too eager, and Lucia's fleeting glance that told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't imagining it. This dinner wasn't about family. It was a game, and they had been playing me from the start. I took another sip of wine, pretending to think about the situation, but my mind was racing. I had to get out of here, but not yet. Not until I understood what they were really after. I turned my attention back to the papers on the table. They weren't just any papers, they were official, serious, legal documents. And I wasn't about to sign anything without knowing exactly what was inside. My hand hovered over the papers as I casually flipped through them, pretending to read, my eyes scanning the words without really seeing them. I knew they were watching me, waiting for me to act. I had to stall. I had to buy myself more time. "So," I said, glancing up at Daniel, who was still watching me closely, "you mentioned something about securing things for the future." I let the words hang in the air, watching him carefully. His smile didn't waver, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something like guilt, or maybe just irritation. Yes, Mom, he said smoothly. Just making sure everything is in order. You know how important it is to have things lined up. I nodded slowly, pretending to process his words. I wasn't buying it. Not for a second. The future. What did that mean? Why now? Why this dinner? And why were they so desperate for me to sign these papers? The answers were right in front of me, hidden in the fine print of those documents, but I couldn't let them know I was onto them just yet. I needed to keep the upper hand. I needed to play this carefully. I see, I said, finally breaking the silence. Well, I think I'd like to take a closer look at these papers before I sign anything. It's not that I don't trust you, Daniel, I added, giving him a pointed look, but it's just a matter of making sure everything is in order. The smile on his face faltered for just a second, and that was enough. I'd gotten under his skin. He didn't like being questioned. Of course, Mom, he said quickly, trying to mask the sudden shift in his tone. Take all the time you need. We just thought it was a formality, you know? But I wasn't convinced. There was more to this, and I was going to find out what it was. Just then, Lucia returned, moving quietly through the room, her footsteps almost silent on the polished floor. She glanced at me once more, her eyes flickering with something unspoken. She set the empty wine bottle on the table and moved toward the kitchen without a word. But that brief moment, that look she gave me, it told me everything. She wasn't just a maid. She knew something. She was part of this, and I needed to figure out where her loyalties really lay. I stared at the envelope once more. The one with my name on it. They wanted me to sign it. But what would happen if I didn't? And what exactly would they do if I found out what was really going on? I had to be careful. The next move had to be mine. But I wasn't going to be trapped. Not yet. The tension in the room was palpable, like the air had thickened around us. I could feel the walls closing in, the weight of their expectations pressing down on me with every second that passed. The clock on the wall ticked louder in my ears, each beat of the second hand a reminder that time was running out. I wasn't going to let them corner me, but I had to play it smart. I picked up my glass of wine again, taking a slow sip, my mind working through the options. What if I just left? What if I walked out right now and refused to sign anything? But something told me that wouldn't be enough. They were too prepared, too sure of themselves. They had thought this through. I had to be smarter. Is there anything else we need to discuss tonight? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, as casual as possible. I wanted to see if they would slip up, if they would give me any more clues. Daniel smiled, a little too quickly. No, Mom. That's everything. His eyes never left mine, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty there now. He was starting to lose control. I could feel it. I think you'd be happy with the way things are going, Ashley added, her tone sweet but with an edge. We just need your signature, and everything will be set. You'll be taken care of, I promise. I could tell she was trying to soothe me, but there was something in the way she said it that made me even more suspicious. She was too eager, too insistent. I set my glass down, my fingers brushing the envelope again. They wanted me to sign it. I could feel it in every nerve of my body. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. I'd like to look over everything one more time, I said, my voice firm. I didn't want to seem too anxious, but I had to buy myself more time. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of thinking they had me. I leaned forward, pretending to inspect the documents, though my mind was elsewhere. Every minute that passed made me feel like I was being suffocated. The room felt too small, too close, and the weight of their eyes was making it harder to think clearly. The seconds felt like hours, and I knew I had to act soon. Just then, Lucia returned. She moved swiftly, her presence almost silent as she refilled my wine glass without saying a word. As she poured, I saw her glance at me again, this time with a deeper look, almost like she was silently pleading with me to understand. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew one thing for sure: Lucia wasn't just a bystander in this. She was involved, and she had been trying to warn me from the beginning. I had to trust that. I had to trust her. As Lucia walked away, I made my decision. I wasn't going to sign anything, not without knowing everything. I looked up at Daniel and Ashley, their faces still too calm, too composed. "I'm sorry, but I think I need to call my lawyer," I said, my voice a little colder than before. "I want to make sure everything is in order." Their smiles faltered for a moment, just a fraction of a second, but it was enough to tell me I had made the right move. I wasn't going to fall for their trap. Not today. The moment the words left my mouth, the room changed. It was subtle at first, just a slight tightening in Daniel's jaw and the way Ashley's fingers froze around her fork. For a second, nobody spoke. The ticking clock on the wall suddenly sounded louder than anything else in the room. Daniel cleared his throat and leaned back in his chair, forcing a small laugh that did not feel natural. "Mom, there is no need to bring a lawyer into this," he said calmly, but I could hear the tension underneath his voice. Ashley quickly leaned forward, her smile returning, though it looked thinner than before. "Margaret, this is just paperwork to make things easier for everyone," she said. "We thought you would appreciate that Daniel could help manage everything for you." I looked at both of them carefully. I had known my son for almost 7 decades, and I knew exactly when he was pretending. Right now he was pretending very hard. I folded my hands neatly on the table and kept my voice steady. "I appreciate the concern," I said slowly, "but I have always believed that important documents deserve careful attention." Daniel's eyes shifted toward the folders again. I could almost see the calculations running through his mind. They had expected this dinner to go smoothly. They had expected me to smile, sign the papers, and go home believing everything was done for my benefit. What they had not expected was hesitation. Ashley tried again, her tone softer, almost sympathetic. "Margaret, you know how complicated property laws can be," she said. "This simply gives Daniel the authority to handle things if something unexpected ever happens." Her words were carefully chosen, but the urgency behind them was impossible to hide. I reached for the documents and turned another page slowly, pretending to study every line. In truth, I had already seen enough to understand the direction they were pushing. Transfer of authority. Property management. Control. All words that sounded harmless until you realized what they really meant. If I signed these papers, my house, the one I had owned for 35 years, would no longer truly be mine. I lifted my eyes toward Daniel again. "Tell me something," I said calmly. "When did you decide this needed to happen?" Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "We have been thinking about it for a while," he said. "It just makes sense." I nodded slowly, though inside I felt something colder than anger. It was disappointment. The kind that settles deep in your chest when you realize someone you trusted has already made plans without you. At that moment Lucia quietly entered the dining room again, carrying a small tray with fresh napkins. She moved carefully around the table, but when she passed behind my chair she paused just long enough for me to hear the faintest whisper. "Do not sign," she murmured. So softly that no one else noticed. My heart skipped a beat. She continued walking as if nothing had happened and set the napkins near Ashley's plate. Daniel was watching me again now, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Mom," he said, leaning forward slightly, "it really would make things easier if we finished this tonight." I looked down at the pen resting beside the papers. For a long moment I did not touch it. Then I slowly reached forward, picked it up, and turned it between my fingers while the entire table watched. The silence became absolute. Ashley held her breath. Daniel stared at the page where the signature line waited. And in that quiet moment I realized something important. They believed the next move belonged to them. But the truth was, the next move was entirely mine. I held the pen between my fingers and let the silence stretch across the table. Daniel was watching the tip of the pen as if the entire evening depended on the next movement of my hand. Ashley leaned slightly forward in her chair, her eyes locked on the signature line like she could already see my name written there. I slowly lowered the pen toward the paper, stopping just an inch above the page. The tension in the room became almost visible. Daniel exhaled softly, and Ashley's shoulders relaxed just a little, as if they both believed the moment had finally arrived. I tilted my head and studied the document again, letting my eyes move carefully across the lines even though I had already read enough to understand exactly what they wanted. Transfer of authority. Property management rights. Legal control over the house I had owned for 35 years. The house where Daniel had grown up. The house where I had spent decades building a life after his father passed away. I gently placed the pen down on the table instead of on the paper. The sound was small, but it echoed through the room like a dropped coin in a quiet church. Daniel blinked. Ashley's smile froze halfway across her face. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands calmly in front of me. I have a question, I said in a quiet, steady voice. Daniel forced a polite expression again. Of course, Mom. What is it? I turned the document slightly toward him and tapped one line. With my finger. Did your lawyer check the most recent county records before preparing this? The question hung in the air like a sudden gust of cold wind. Daniel frowned slightly. Ashley looked confused for a moment before quickly masking it with another careful smile. I am not sure what you mean, she said lightly. Everything here was prepared professionally. I nodded slowly as if I had expected that answer. Inside, however, I could already see the cracks forming in their confidence. I picked up the pen again and rolled it gently between my fingers while looking directly at Daniel. Because something very important changed last month, I continued calmly. Daniel shifted in his seat. The confidence that had filled the room earlier was beginning to drain away, replaced by uncertainty. Ashley glanced briefly toward the leather briefcase near the sideboard, as if the answer might somehow be hiding inside it. I reached for my glass of water instead of the wine this time and took a slow sip before continuing. You see, I said, placing the glass back down, before tonight's dinner invitation ever arrived, I had already met with my own attorney. Daniel's eyes widened slightly. Ashley's expression stiffened. Across the room Lucia had paused near the doorway, pretending to adjust a curtain but clearly listening to every word. I turned the document around so the signature line faced them again. And during that meeting, I said quietly, I made a decision about the future of my property. Daniel leaned forward now, the calm mask finally beginning to slip. What decision? He asked. I allowed a small, composed smile to appear. The same smile I had learned to wear after many years of handling difficult situations. A decision that makes these papers completely unnecessary, I said gently. For a moment neither of them spoke. The air between us felt different now. The trap they believed they had carefully prepared was beginning to shift beneath their own feet, and they could feel it. Daniel stared at the documents again, then back at me, clearly trying to understand what I had just implied. Ashley's voice finally broke the silence, though it sounded far less confident than before. Margaret, she said slowly, what exactly did you change last month? I met her eyes calmly, knowing that the next words I spoke would change the entire evening. For a long moment nobody moved. Daniel stared at me like he was trying to solve a puzzle that suddenly had missing pieces. Ashley's confident smile had completely disappeared now, replaced by something sharper, something closer to concern. I kept my posture relaxed, my hands folded neatly on the table, giving them plenty of time to think about what I had just said. The clock on the wall continued its quiet ticking, marking the seconds of silence between us. Daniel finally leaned forward, his voice lower than before. Mom, what exactly did you do last month? I looked at him carefully. I remembered the little boy who used to run through my backyard chasing a baseball, the same backyard attached to the house they were now trying to control. Life had a strange way of turning familiar faces into strangers. I reached calmly for the folder again and closed it gently, sliding the papers back toward the center of the table. Last month, I said slowly, I met with my attorney to review my estate planning. Ashley shifted in her chair. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. I continued speaking in the same calm tone. During that meeting we discussed my house, my savings, and everything that would eventually need to be handled when I am no longer here. Daniel glanced down at the documents again, clearly trying to understand where this was going. Ashley spoke next, her voice carefully controlled. That is exactly what we are trying to help with tonight. I allowed myself a small, patient smile. Yes, I said, I understand that now. I leaned slightly forward and placed one finger on the stack of papers they had prepared for me. But the timing is unfortunate. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? I met his eyes directly. I mean that the property you are trying to gain authority over tonight is no longer structured the way you think it is. The words landed heavily on the table between us. Ashley blinked. Daniel's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. I continued before either of them could interrupt. My attorney helped me place the house into a protected living trust. I spoke slowly so every word was clear. That trust cannot be altered by documents like these. Daniel straightened in his chair. A trust, he repeated. Ashley's eyes moved quickly across the papers again, as if the answer might suddenly appear there. I nodded calmly. Yes. The trust was finalized 4 weeks ago and recorded with the county office. I paused for a moment, letting the information settle in. Across the room Lucia stood quietly near the hallway, pretending to adjust a decorative lamp but clearly listening. Daniel looked back at me, frustration beginning to creep into his voice. Why would you do that without telling us? I held his gaze steadily. Because important decisions about my home deserve careful thought. Ashley exhaled slowly, clearly trying to recover control of the situation. That still does not explain who manages the trust, she said carefully. Someone has to handle it. I leaned back in my chair and allowed the smallest hint of satisfaction to show in my expression. You are correct, I said calmly. Someone does. Daniel waited. Ashley waited. The entire room felt suspended in that moment. Then I spoke again, my voice steady and unmistakably clear. But it is not either of you.